Welcome to the Probate Nation. You know, estates and probate often need to sell real estate to pay the debts and then the bequests of the decedent. And conservatorships oftentimes need to sell the real estate to pay for the medical and other care needs of the incapacitated adult. It sounds simple enough, but you are a fiduciary with fiduciary obligations. So what you should do to maximize, what should you do to maximize the sale price and get the property sold sooner rather than later? And that's a good question, but I would add it is just as important to know what you should not do. Our show today is the first of a two-part series that focuses on the process of selling real estate in a Georgia estate or conservatorship. And we are delighted to have two experienced realtors as our guests. They will address the do's and don'ts, along with a host of other suggestions they encourage you to keep in mind. If you are a Georgia executor or conservator, I encourage you to sit back and soak up the wealth of information they will be sharing. So let me tell you a little bit about our guests. Our first guest is a Georgia native. He graduated from Kennesaw State University in Georgia with a civil engineering degree. And since graduation, he has been the director of land development for several large national builders. In recent years, he has worked as a licensed real estate broker, and today he is a top producing broker with Atlanta Community Real Estate Brokerage, where he sells residential real estate from the Atlanta metro area to the Georgia mountains. Our second guest graduated from the University of Houston, also with a civil engineering degree. Over the ensuing years after his graduation, he has worked in the real estate industry as an owner, developer, builder, and licensed realtor of residential homes in the greater Atlanta community. It is noteworthy that at each step in his career, he has won awards for his work. He is presently the managing broker and vice president at Atlanta Community's real estate brokerage, Cherokee Operations. Please welcome Georgia Realtors Carl Hawthorne and Robert Williamson. Gentlemen, welcome and thanks for jumping on the show to share all your expertise today. So, as we get started, one of the very first things that comes to mind, which I wanted to start the program with, is talking about understanding your legal authority. Whether you have the first step in this entire process of selling real estate, by an administrator or conservator, is understanding, do you have the legal authority? In the case of an executor, you need to take a look at the will, you take a look and make sure you've got appropriate court documents that say you are in charge and you have the power to sell. If you're a conservator handling the estate for someone who's an incapacitated adult, you need to also take a look at those court papers and make sure that you've been properly appointed by the court so you can actually take care of the assets. And then finally, some people actually have done some planning, and so you might be using a financial power of attorney to handle real estate, and you want to make sure that that power of attorney is in proper form and is going to work in your situation. Now, all of these things seem to be relatively easy to understand, but the reality is that you really need, at this stage, to talk with the Georgia attorney and make sure the authority you're going to act under will work to dispose of whatever real estate you need to handle, whether in an estate, in a conservatorship, or if pursuant to a power of attorney. So now we're going to go ahead and take a look and get our realtors involved and begin to talk about some of the initial steps. We now have verified you have the authority, and now you're talking to a realtor. And so in an estate, I got to ask, Robert, in an estate, should an executor get a date of death appraisal? And if so, why?
Thanks, Richard. Yes, definitely a date of death appraisal is needed. And I'm sure this applies to other states as well as Georgia. But that's the appraisal that is going to be done by an independent third-party professional appraiser. And it'll be used to establish the value of the real estate for income tax purposes and perhaps estate tax purposes. So it's going to be needed for a lot of different things. And then also it's going to be valuable to share that with a realtor once the executor chooses a realtor so that it can assist them in a study of value that the realtor will do that'll be a little bit more slanted toward maximizing the sales price for the benefit of the estate.
I think that's a very good point. Now, but on the other hand, if I'm a conservator or I'm using a power of attorney, is there any point in order to get the property appraised formally?
So a conservatorship is a little bit different in that you're going to have to establish the value. And I believe in the state of Georgia, you'd want to consult with your title attorney. But after you would get an offer on the property, I think it would need to go back to the court, and the court would take the appraisal and the offer that you have on the property and have to approve the sale.
Okay, so the appraisal really is not so much important for a conservator for establishing the tax basis, because the person has not yet passed away. Carl, you know, as we're sort of working our way forward to figure out value, tell me a little bit about what is this thing called a market analysis, Carl, that people use to, that realtors use in order to begin to figure out what we should try to sell this property for?
So the way I see a market analysis is looking like you're facing the road and seeing the houses active, ones that just currently went under contract, versus the appraisal is looking in the rearview mirror and looking at past transactions that have passed, and which is great determining value at that time, but we're kind of looking in the rear instead of seeing what trend is currently in the future. And currently in the markets that we're seeing, that inventory is low, prices are increasing, and if you go off a appraisal that's in the rear, you're going to miss some value that a buyer, a market value that a buyer may be willing to buy, and you would lose some money on the table for that seller.
Okay, so it is important from a market analysis standpoint, no matter whether I got an appraisal or not, when I come in and see the realtor, I need them to take a look at what's really going on in the market and looking forward, because I think prices are rising across many of these real estate markets. Now, Carl, you come to this house, you're beginning to start to get your hands around what you're dealing with. How important is it to empty the house out?
So it's very important to make sure that people can see what their furniture would look like in a home. And when there's too many things, too many personalized items from photographs and other things, it starts detracting from the value when people are, one, if they think that this has just been left and no one's taking care of it, they're going to probably offer less because they think there is some kind of urgency in place, versus a home that is, you can walk through and it looks like someone really cares about what's going on, then you're probably going to get a higher value for that when it hits the market.
Okay. Now, Robert, you know, we often have heard the importance about having the home inspected by your own home inspector before you actually put the house on the market. What's your thoughts about having a pre-sale home inspection done on the property, Robert?
So there's a couple of different ways to do that, and estates are a little bit different from an individual seller in this regard. Many times estates want to sell the house as is, and there's some good reasons for that. The beneficiaries of the will or the executor may not be familiar with the condition of the property. They many times have never lived in the property, and there may be a limited amount of money for them to make pre-listing repairs and get everything in tip-top shape. So it's kind of a two sides to the coin, Richard. In one case, as realtors, if you want to maximize value, we're going to advise you to do a pre-sale inspection, get everything into tip-top shape, get that house staged, and that's the way you're going to get maximum value in the marketplace. On the other hand, because of the unique circumstances of an estate, the executor may choose to do as little repair as possible, but as Carl was saying, they still need to concentrate on removing all the clutter from the house and making the house show as well as possible.
I can understand the pre-inspection concerns that you guys have expressed. I know we have seen that be very helpful in trying to ward off problems that we know is going to happen when someone comes to inspect the house. Um, excuse me. Carl, tell me a little bit about some of the lessons you've learned, as we come up to this point of our show, things you learned in your experience about pre-home inspections and the clutter, pardon me, that have somehow come into play in some of the deals you worked on, Carl.
So currently in this market, we're finding that there is a huge difference in what you can sell a home for and how many days on market it will stay based on its condition. Buyers are paying more than they ever imagined for a home, and they're paying a higher payment for that home as well with the higher interest rates. So they're 1 foot in, 1 foot out in most these deals. And we're seeing somewhere around a 25 to 20% can rate, people terminating contracts after home inspections. So if you want your house to look blemished by going in and out of contracts multiple times, then you're basically going to lose value in doing such, versus if you go ahead, spend the money, you can actually make money on the money you spend by having it move-in ready, which is what the consumer today is wanting.
Interesting. Robert, how about yourself? Your perspective on some of these things as far as decluttering the house and pre-home inspections. Any other comments you want to share, some of the lessons you've learned? 'Cause I know you oversee a lot of brokers down there.
One other thing that I'll bring up, sellers in Georgia are required to disclose important information about the house, especially latent defects. So many times executors think they don't have to make disclosures. They say, well, we've never lived in the house, we don't know anything about it. But frequently, even a beneficiary, an executor, they do have some information in the house. And in Georgia, the way to protect them from any future liability is that they disclose that information. So if they choose to have a pre-sale inspection done and learn some things about the house, it needs to be disclosed to the buyer. And then finally, I'll say, as realtors, we advise and give them our recommendations, and ultimately the owner and the executor make the decision on the condition of the property and what they're going to do to get it ready to go to market.
Sure, of course. Carl, I'm going to jump back to you. What are your thoughts about having a title search done on the property in advance of even putting the property on the market, so that you can figure out whether there's any problems with title that might need to be corrected? What are your thoughts, and what's your experience been with that?
My experience is when someone takes possession of the property through a probate, typically they were not aware that Aunt Sue or Uncle Jack had a contractor lien, or how many mortgages they had, if they had a reverse mortgage. A lot of those things will come out once you're already under contract, and then you may lose that buyer when they cannot, as far as when the seller is unable to wash that lien away in time enough for closing. Then that property goes back in the market and it looks like it's damaged goods. So it's always great to get that title search done quickly on a probated property.
Robert, how about yourself? What are your thoughts about that? And again, you've had a lot of experience with these properties as well,
Sure.
especially coming through estates.
Well, what we see sometimes is beneficiaries in the will think they have the authority to sell the house immediately. They don't have that authority in Georgia unless they're joint tenants in common with right of survivorship, which is a way that the deed is structured. So they, through their realtor, can contact a title attorney, but the main thing, they have to go through the probate and be appointed by the court as the executor before they have the authority to sign the listing agreement, let alone the sales contract.
Sure, sure. Carl, coming back to you, the next thing in the process as you guys begin to look at these houses is tell me a little bit about, again, what kind of condition are the buyers today looking for? Do they want to have a homeowner repair and have a do-it-yourself or fixer-upper, or do they want to have it in pristine condition?
So we're dealing with a buyer that is doesn't like projects. Years ago, I would take buyers into a home and they would be going, wow, I could get this at this lower price and then I could do all the work myself or hire it and look at all the equity that I will gain. Well, that's not the consumer today. The consumer today, for some reason, is not a project person, and they would rather pay more for it to be completed. And also, many times, they don't have the time frame to let that work to be completed when they move in. They don't want to have a construction or war zone while they're trying to move into this house and live life.
Sure. Now, sort of take that to the next extension. So then, as you begin to kind of assess the properties that the house is going to compete against, does that come into play as far as the types of repairs and work you think needs to be done in order to make sure you can compete properly?
Yes, so I take an approach where I will go in for a seller and let them know, if you leave it as is, this is the value at which it will sell, versus if you go through A through X, this is the cost of doing that, and this is what you could sell it for. You make the decision based on your means and let them make that educated decision. If we're going to leave it as is, we need to price it accordingly in this market, or it will sit for 60, 90 days if it's not move-in ready.
Sure. Now, if there's work to be done, Robert, do you recommend that the homeowner do it, or do you guys like to bring in your trusted contractors to go ahead and get this thing done in a quick fashion, Robert?
Right. Most of the time you can depend on a professional realtor to have a network of contractors that they can recommend that'll come in, dependable, honest, do the work in a reasonable amount of time. And that's the best way to go about this, especially for an estate situation where owners could be not local, have their own family affairs that they're having to handle, and really not have time to do the job. The other thing I might mention is you want those contractors to be licensed in the city or county where you're operating, so that you can save the receipts and show the new buyers what work has been done by a reputable contractor.
And Robert, should all of the, again, you realtors are very experienced, so you understand kind of what the marketplace is demanding as far as properties and the consequences of not doing certain things. But should all of the work that you identified, should all the work be done, or are there things that have a higher priority over other things in the house that should be done?
Right. So definitely if it has to do with safety issues, and I'll use an example, a deck handrail or steps that are not to code, any of those safety issues. Also probably mechanical systems, plumbing, heating, electrical. Most people are not going to give serious consideration to a house that don't have those working mechanical systems in place. Beyond that, it's going to come down to a value decision that the owner has to make based on the best advice from the realtor.
Okay. Well, we're getting to that point now where I want to kind of draw on you guys to kind of assess from what we've talked about so far, what are the things you want to really bring to bear and make sure people don't forget about as we sort of begin to wind down this particular show. So Robert, why don't you go ahead and jump into that first? Some final suggestions, observations, comments, lessons learned. I know we have more to discuss in the future show, but I'd like to see from what we've talked about so far today.
Okay. Yeah, well, one thing for someone to remember when they're dealing with an estate, make sure you have the authority to actually sell the house before you hire a realtor to put it on the market. You don't want to get under contract and then find out, oh, I still have to go back to court. It throws a delay into the whole system, and you may lose that buyer and have to go back to square one and start all over again. So make sure you've got the authority. Make sure that you're interviewing your realtor and that they have the expertise and have been through this type of process before, so they know how to guide you to a successful sale.
Okay. Carl, how about yourself? You've been doing this for a long time as well. Some further thoughts, some points you really want to stress from our talk so far today?
So see a lot of issues when people are going to probate and they don't know who to use. And just like if you have a heart issue, you shouldn't just go to any surgeon, you should go to a heart doctor. You really should reach out and find an attorney that focuses on estates and wills and probates to be able to make sure this process doesn't go out for years. And I get calls all the time where we're still in probate and it's over a year. And unfortunately, they just used a general practicing attorney, which that's great. But do they have the connections? Do they understand everything that's involved? Do they practice their craft in this all the time to be able to expedite this probate? I see many times these people that inherit properties, they were not prepared for the tax loads and the bills and maintenance and utilities that they're saddled with until they get this probated.
Certainly I will say that that is true. And as we stressed at the outset of this program, I think it's worth, that hour of time to sit down with somebody in advance to kind of guide you with the things you probably need to keep in mind and the pitfalls you need to avoid so things will go more smoothly. There are so many do-it-yourselfers these days that is certainly something to be happy about. But this is one area where you probably want to get a little bit of advice at the outset, just to make sure you're on the right track, and then touch base back with that lawyer from time to time to make sure you're on the right track as things progress. So, well, I think that's everything. Unless there's anything else you fellows want to add to this part of the program, I think that covers this program. I want to thank Robert Williamson and Carl Hawthorne from the Atlantic Communities Real Estate Brokerage. These guys have been doing this for years. They did a great job in this program. They've educated us really immensely, and a great benefit to all the folks in the Probate Nation community down in Atlanta, Georgia. So we want to thank you guys for taking the time to do it today. And I hope that I can impose on you guys to come back and kind of finish the discussion in a show next week.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
Yes.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Folks, selling real estate presents a host of challenges if you want to sell the property without delay for the best price possible. Our guest tonight shined a light on some of the initial to-dos as you undertake this task. Be sure about ownership of the property with the title search so you can clean up title well in advance of closing. Have a look at what properties on the market will be competing with your property for a buyer, and make appropriate improvements and repairs that will serve to enhance the marketability of the property. But most importantly, listen to the advice of real estate professionals who work in the marketplace every day. This concludes our show on part one, but there's more to be done to sell that real estate, and our guest will complete this discussion next week in part two, when they address staging the property, listing the property for sale, accepting an offer, and closing the deal. This concludes our show this evening. Just a reminder that replays of the show can be viewed on the Probate Nation website and YouTube channel. And if you want to receive our monthly estate administration and probate tips newsletter, please sign up for the free Probate Nation newsletter. Thank you for visiting with us. Until next time, I am Richard Ruddy, and this is the Probate Nation.